I got involved with the project in 2011 because I was working as an inspector with the Department of Education and Skills at the time, and 1/4 of my remit was involved with the social inclusion unit of the department. The project really stemmed from the work that was already happening in schools in collaboration with the Department of Education and Skills. I worked as an inspector with the department in 2011, and at that stage we were particularly focusing on children in disadvantaged schools and trying to support them in a variety of ways and support their teachers as well. So there was a huge partnership between the schools and the Department of Education at that stage. But of course, naturally, the department was also linking in with Mary Immaculate College, and we were facilitating Mary I and the department an Oscailt network with the principals in the schools. So in 2011, Regeneration approached the Department of Education and Skills and invited us to make an application for funding for a grant from Atlantic Philanthropies. And at that stage, we invited our partners, already well established Mary Immaculate College and Limerick Education Centre, which has the brief for the professional development of all teachers. We invited them to form a consortium at that stage. We knew that we had the full backing of the principals in the schools because we were continuously meeting with them and networking with them. And at that stage already in 2011, we had a network group of teachers, 4 teachers, ex-quota post teachers in the disadvantaged schools. And we were focusing their work already on 2 aspects, behaviour management and also on the development of literacy and numeracy skills. So this provided us with a springboard to focus further on literacy. And Limerick Regeneration, particularly as a result of the Fitzgerald report, which was a report commissioned by the government, was focusing on working on social exclusion and social disadvantage and education disadvantage. So our application fitted very neatly into that strand of the Fitzgerald report, and also was a response by Atlantic Philanthropies and government to support children in disadvantaged areas. So at that stage, the Department of Education and Skills gave matching funds to the initiative, and Atlantic Philanthropies gave us a sizable amount of money to which we could actually plan and implement a literacy-based initiative. At that stage in 2011 as well, the Department of Education and Skills had just produced the Literacy and Numeracy Strategy, which is a strategy which really focuses on literacy and numeracy from 2011 onwards to 2020, and it covers all sectors of education from early years right up to 3rd level. So it very much, for the first time, set out the department's priority on making sure everyone was literate and numerate. Also in 2012, the department published school self-evaluation guidelines for schools. So this again focused in on how to improve schools, how to improve children's outcomes, their learning experiences, and the quality of teaching in the schools. So the literacy initiative really addressed those 2 key priorities, literacy and numeracy plus school self-evaluation. The greatest strength of the project that we have found is the energy and the synergy that can be obtained from people working together at every level, the collaboration that could happen between schools, inter-schools, schools working with the Department of Education and Skills, schools working with Mary I working with the Department of Education and Skills and Limerick Education Centre together on common objectives and common aims. Teachers themselves took ownership of the initiative. The network teachers, we eventually had 8 network teachers, 1 between each pair of schools, or in some instances where schools amalgamated, one dedicated teacher per school. And this allowed schools to share practice. So you had cross-pollination of ideas. You had teachers opening up their classrooms for classroom visits from other people. So initially, when the project and the initiative started, we actually had open days where a teacher would say, I have a very interesting thing we're doing in our school. Do you want to come and see it? So we would all go, inspectors, LEC, Mary I, and we would watch the initiative, plus the teachers as well. And then it always followed up within a week or two with a reflective session, which was facilitated by Limerick Education Centre. And there were the questions: what did you do? What did we think really worked well? What would you like to do in your classroom? Do you need any supports to do that? So it really was a deep level analysis of teachers at their own, identifying their own needs and saying, this is how I'd like support, but also I want to celebrate what I'm doing in my classroom as well, which is really, really important, because when teachers feel that sense of ownership, a sense of success, a moral imperative, that really has a huge amount of authenticity for other teachers. We focused all the time on teachers' professional development because, as you've said correctly, there are various literacy initiatives in all the schools, and we had done a trawl of that initially to find out what was there. And first steps had been in the schools, delivered by Desh Quidahori, which were advisors from the Department of Education. There were various reading initiatives such as Reading Recovery, and the Department of Education had invested in those. So all those were happening. And we knew as well that teachers' scores really hadn't improved, and children's scores hadn't improved dramatically as a result of those initiatives. So we didn't really want to focus on just what the children were doing, because the pupil cohorts in these schools were very unstable at the time. There was a lot of rehousing of children, an awful lot of children coming into areas from other countries with English as additional language, a lot of movement between the cities, a lot of amalgamations. We wanted more to focus on empowering teachers, building their skills, and making them greater sense of agency in themselves, in their capacity to teach and to respond to the children's needs that they had in their classrooms. For many of the Desh schools, they had first of all to create a community within their own schools, because there had been a huge amount of change. Desh schools, by their very nature, would employ young teachers each year and maybe would have lost teachers. So teacher migration from schools was a huge problem between 2004, 2007. So when eventually staffs started to stabilise, they then had to build a community. Now, many of the schools as well had changes at leadership level of principals, deputy principals, and key appointments were made at that time. Because of the flux in the pupil population, you lost teachers, you gained teachers, and at times you may get teachers in from panel arrangements. These are agreed arrangements from other schools that had no understanding of disadvantage or working with children from a disadvantaged community. So there was a huge amount of work from the staffs themselves in building a collaborative nature. Also, while a good climate might have pervaded in many of the schools, teachers really taught in their own classrooms in isolation. And one of the strengths of the initiative is that really this has broken down the classroom doors and opened it up, so that now when we go and visit the classrooms, teachers are working in small networks, in groups, at whole school level to a far greater extent than previously done. Also, there isn't this anxiety about demonstrating practices or modelling for other teachers. This has become really, I suppose, hallmark of the schools involved in the initiative. So they built community at individual school level and then with their neighbouring schools. So rather than being seen as competing for children, where children are the greatest resource that we have in these schools, in fact the collaboration has led, I think, to the amalgamations and the ease of amalgamations among the restructuring of schools in the city itself. The network group is a group now of 8 teachers, and they meet monthly. So their role is to lead the initiative in their schools and to provide supports for other teachers. But when they come for their network meetings, they share resources, ideas, they share readings, they share assessment techniques. They also get access to CPD that they have identified as a cohort. So they're also working in a collaborative nature at a different level. And they're led from within. So they define their own needs, their own CPD needs, their own learning needs, and it's always job embedded. And that's the key thing. And I think from any of the literature you find, once the teaching and the CPD is linked very closely together, it's instructional led, it's embedded, that has real meaning for teachers. So it really had traction for the network teachers, and they saw this as a real opportunity to lead from within their schools, but also lead within the network. I think the teachers accessed expertise from the personnel in Mary I. They also accessed expertise from the psychological services. They also accessed professional development supports, PDST. And I think really what they found was that they could go to the consortium with their concerns, they could express them, and they were really managed very well, or at least as best they could in the structures that we had devised under such time pressures at the time. But what it did, it broke down that external view that no longer was the expert from Mary Immaculate seen as the expert, but rather someone who was coming to guide teachers on their next step of learning. And the learning was from both sides, that the experts or the expertise that came from the College of Education also gained from that deep relationship with schools. Also, the Department of Education, rather than being seen as external and just focused on accountability and meeting standards, also was seen as a very much an advisory and supportive role, because the meetings, the Uscailt network, certainly allowed the principals of the schools to really input into the design of the initiative, to the priorities every year. And in fact, the initiative should have ended in 2014. We have gone through 3 phases. We've gone through a very sharp planning phase, an implementation phase where all the CPD was really provided, and this embedding and sustainability phase, which was never planned for at all, but happened by default because the groups wanted to stay together. They wanted the continued support. They saw this as really valuable, and they persevered. So we continued to eke out the final amount of resources in the best way possible to keep this initiative going, and also to provide the network of teacher support from the Department of Education and Skills. We have gone through a huge period since 1998 with the introduction of the first education legislation in Ireland. We've gone through a period of significant change, curriculum change with the introduction of the revised curriculum in 1999, and in 2005 with the introduction of the DESH strategy. And every year teachers really, I suppose, are bombarded with new initiatives, new focus. But this has probably been one of the most enduring legacy outcomes I feel that we will have seen in DESH schools in Limerick City. We have a stronger school cohort in its structure, in the way that teachers and schools interact with each other, and we certainly have a dedicated focus on literacy. And I don't think that could have been achieved without this initiative, and without the way the initiative has really embedded itself within the schools and in the structure of school life. For all schools, literacy is a priority. When school self-evaluation was introduced, all of the schools in the city agreed to prioritise literacy, and that has remained their key priority for the last 4 years. To get that amount of agreement and consensus from whole staffs across now 12 schools has been enormous, and the outcomes from the children can be seen in their end-of-year standardised test results in most settings, in the professional development of the teachers that we see and their engagement with professional development, and in their liaison with the Department of Education, Mary Immaculate and Limerick Education Centre. So the DESH Literacy Initiative to me has had a sustaining effect on the quality of teachers' instructional skills and on children's learning.